Okay, so I want to break this down where we left off on the last episode. So again, this is an Englishman. And he's speaking to his fellow countrymen. And so he says, when the influence of the crown, strengthened by luxury and by a universal profligacy of manners. So, universal profligacy. So this is like a wantonness, a sort of a wastefulness, perhaps a poor use of manners. So strengthened by luxury and universal wastefulness of manners will have tainted every heart, broken down every fence of liberty, and rendered us a nation of tame and contented vassals. So this seems to me a nation of tame and contented vassals, almost to refer, I think, to sort of the feudal age, or the feudal system of governance. That is, somebody who owns land and subjugates the serfs to work it for their own ends, essentially. When a general election will be nothing but an auction of boroughs. So an auction is sort of a bidding scheme where people bid on what they believe is most valuable. And when the Parliament and Grand Council of the nation, and once the faithful guardian of the state and a terror to evil ministers, will be degenerated into a body of sycophants, dependent and venal. So, and the reason it would be a faithful guardian of the state and a terror to evil ministers is because it's just. It is after the truth. And it's a terror to evil ministers is because evil ministers are corrupt. They accept bribes. They are not after justice. They're not after truth. And so this Englishman says, this faithful guardian of the state, this terror to evil ministers, will be degenerated into a body of sycophants. So this word, sycophant, or sycophant, I suppose it means a person who tries to gain favor of another by being overly servile or subject to them in order to gain their favor, and so that they will have some sort of standing. It's this sort of like parasitic type of individual. So he's essentially saying it will be degraded into a parasitic body, right? That just this disgusting thing that feeds off of another just for their own gain, right? It's nothing to benefit the whole. It's not for the good of the country or of the people. It is to preserve the individual, essentially. This extreme perversion of the individual liberty. They're just doing whatever they want. The morals are gone. There is this, like we said earlier, this profligacy of manners, right? Such, it is possible, may come a time or other, be the state of Great Britain. And then he says, well, what will, at that period, be the duty of the colonies? And of course, the answer to that is, well, the duties of the colonists, of the Americans, will be to say, you know what, guys, you made a big misstep here. Your government is off. What at once was the seat of liberty and virtue the legislative body, consisting of able, independent men who govern with wisdom and justice, it is now no longer that. And we're going to have to separate from you. And he asks, will they still be bound to unconditional submission? And no, the answer is obviously no. Must they always continue independence to our government? No, of course not. They'll find no reason to do it, and follow it implicitly through every change that can happen to it. And the answer is no. And it's interesting here because there's an implication on the part of this Englishman that suggests that the colonists are from this pure tradition. Again, to refer to the beginning of this quote here, of Britain being the seat of liberty, virtue, and again, his legislature consisting of a body of able and independent men who govern with wisdom and justice. The colonists come from this. They have departed this country prior, well, perhaps as this degeneration of the system started to take place, but still they come from this culture, and it is this very culture that have gave birth to them. And then it's in their birth and their expansion out into the world that this light now shines elsewhere, where here it now begins to dim for us, the parents of this liberty. So it's an interesting reflection. And so the other thing I wanted to say here is a reflection to the modern day. And so I believe I mentioned this earlier in an earlier episode about the sort of the liquid nature of liberty. At once it remains the same in its heart, but at another time it appears, its superficial form, it takes on a different form superficially, depending on the age, depending on the context, and all of this. And in our modern day, it is certainly different. Again, I mentioned this before. It's a matter of internal threats rather than external. It's a matter of the individual taking responsibility, civic responsibility. But I can't deny that the things that this Englishman is talking about in critique of his own government, of just following his own reason and saying, you know what, if this continues, this, and this is going to happen. This is a perennial thing, even though on its surface, it appears to us a moment in history that has passed us by. But if we read beneath it, if we see the pattern of this story, we see that it repeats. It can repeat in the very heart of a man, in the very soul of a man, and it can repeat in the very heart or soul of a nation. It doesn't matter on the level of reality. It can exist. That's what it sort of means to be perennial. It exists at all times. It's an undying pattern of our existence. Wretched condition, indeed, for millions of free men as good as ourselves. It certainly would be if they had to submit to that decaying system. Will you say that we now govern equitably, and that there is no such danger of a revolution? And again, the answer to that is no. I'm glad he's asking easy questions for me to answer. Of course, these are rhetorical questions. He's not intending me to answer them because he's setting up the reason in the first place for you to say no to the question. And he sort of answers it too. Would to God that this were true. But will you not always say the same? Who shall judge whether we govern equitably or not? Yeah, who is going to retain the light of the mind? Who is going to come out of the cave in the Platonic sense to judge? where does this judgment come if it leaves a state, if it leaves a man? Where does it go? Does it have to reside in at least one man for it to exist at all? Well, if it didn't, then it never would have happened in the first place. That's why it's a miracle for us to be here. The sort of divine spark that came to us from who knows where, that began this such a rich tradition, that began the faith of man, that expanded the soul of man, that expanded the mind of man, that gave him light in the darkness. And of course, this is something that can be lost in time. This can be lost due to unrecognizable circumstances and the inability to see beneath the patterns that lie beneath the superficial architecture that hides true liberty or truth, I think, even more generally. Can you give the colonies any security that such a period will ever come? No. The answers. The period, countrymen, has already come. It's already here. They've already grabbed onto the liberty that we are slowly losing. The calamities were at our door. The rod of oppression was raised over us. We were roused from our slumbers, and we may never sink into repose until we can convey a clear and undisputed inheritance to our posterity. So, this last few sentences here, when it starts with no, the quote ends. So this is Samuel Adams now. And he's saying the period, countrymen, it's here. The time is now. The calamities were at our door. The rod of oppression was raised over us by England. We were roused from our slumbers. We may never sink into repose until we can convey a clear and undisputed inheritance to our posterity. This day we are called upon to give a glorious example of what the wisest and best men were rejoiced to view only in speculation. This day presents the world with the most august spectacle its annals have ever unfolded. Millions of free men, deliberately and voluntarily forming themselves into a society for their common defense and common happiness. Immortal spirits of Hampden, Locke, and Sydney, will it not add to your benevolent joys to behold your posterity rising to the dignity of men, and evincing to the world the reality and expediency of your systems, and in the actual enjoyment of that equal liberty which you were happy when on earth, in delineating and recommending to mankind. So there is something very profound here that I think deserves to be unpacked. So let's consider it. This is saying this day, this very day, presents the world with the most august spectacle its annals have ever unfolded. That is quite the statement, because he's saying millions of free men deliberately and voluntarily forming themselves into a society, the people who retain, millions of them who retain the light of the mind, are forming themselves into a society for their common defense and common happiness. Okay. So will it not add to your benevolent joy to behold your posterity, your children, rising to the dignity of men, and evincing to the whole world the reality and expediency of your systems, to convince everybody that this is the true way, the true path to walk? And again, we have to keep in mind the elusive nature of liberty. What can at one time feel or appear to be liberty may at another age be different. And so, if we were to use this, let's say, system, it may look very differently today. You often hear people, we just can't go back to this period. There's truth in that. We can't go back to this revolutionary period. There are certain things that we can retain, obviously, certain fundamentals of our institutions that we retain, and in that sense we can go back to sort of dust off the surfaces and to polish them up a little bit. But new things to be added have to be added, given the modern context, given the change in societal dynamics, to reopen the box of liberty that is shut almost at every moment. There is a box of liberty somewhere that is shut because of some changing circumstance. And perhaps that's not the best analogy to use, but I think it's sufficient for now. And in the actual enjoyment of that equal liberty, which you were happy when on earth. This part is exceedingly interesting to me, because I don't quite understand it. And in the actual enjoyment of that liberty, which you were happy when on earth. When on earth. So who is he talking to? It's an interesting thing to ask. Who is Mr. Adams talking to here? And in the actual enjoyment of that equal liberty which you were happy when on earth, and delineating and recommending to mankind. You could be talking about God here. God giving liberty, giving that light. This is a miracle. If the books of the Bible continued, and certainly they do in their own way, but this would be something, if this was like an Old Testament book, for example, and if this was the sort of the plight of the Israelites, which this story is in there, obviously. It's the same story, just sort of repeated over again, in a new context, again, a new veneer to which to view it. We're no longer escaping Egypt. We're escaping England. But the light of the mind still persists. God's people still persist. And so he says, and in the actual enjoyment of that equal liberty, which you were happy when on earth, and delineated and recommending to mankind. Other nations have received their laws from conquerors. Some are indebted for a constitution to the sufferings of their ancestors through revolving centuries. So again, other nations have received their laws from conquerors. Some are indebted for a constitution to the sufferings of their ancestors through revolving centuries. The people of this country alone have formally and deliberately chosen a government for themselves, and with open and uninfluenced consent bound themselves to a social compact. Here no man proclaims his birth or wealth as a title of honorable distinction, or to sanctify ignorance and vice with the same name of hereditary authority. He who has most zeal and ability to promote public felicity, let him be the servant of the public. This is the only line of distinction drawn by nature. Leave the bird of night to the obscurity for which nature intended him, and expect only from the eagle to burst the clouds with his wings and look boldly in the face of the sun. So there you go, the imagery of the eagle, of the bald eagle, of liberty. So I'd like to repave this surface to make it a bit smoother and to make it seem a little bit more satisfying. Sam Adams says, here no man proclaims his birth or wealth as a title to honorable distinction or to satisfy ignorance and vice with the name of hereditary authority. So again, a hierarchy may exist at one time, but it's not an excuse. It should not be an excuse to sanctify ignorance and vice within the very name of that hereditary authority. Because hierarchies always exist in society. But the hierarchy of hereditary authority, it cannot proclaim a title to honorable distinction if it is not true, if it's not aimed at the highest. He who has most zeal and ability to promote public felicity, let him be the servant of the public. So he is who is most forthright, who understands this problem rightly. Let him be the one that serves the public, because this person understands. This person will take care of our posterity. This is the only line of distinction drawn by nature. Leave the bird of the night to the obscurity for which nature intended him. So, interesting comparison here. And expect only from the eagle to burst the clouds with his wings and look boldly in the face of the sun. So we can have our hierarchies, in a sense. A liberated version of the hierarchy, because he says, leave the bird of the night to the obscurity for which nature intended him. There will always be birds of the night. What's important for us, what's important for free men, for free people, is to not let the bird of the night blind our eyes and make us believe that he is the eagle that bursts through the clouds with his wings and looks boldly into the face of the sun. Because the bird of the night is the bird of the night. Full stop. The ignorance and vice in the name of hereditary authority is ignorance and vice in the name of hereditary authority. If hereditary authority is to be, it is to be always the eagle that bursts through the clouds with his wings that looks boldly into the face of the sun. If it introduces itself, again, as a bird of the night, then it no longer deserves that hereditary authority. Now, I'm not making a case for an autocracy or a monarchy, but I am trying to draw out this distinction here, that in every system, this problem persists of the bird of the night and the eagle that's willing to face the sun.